Let's start with the basics. When you talk about crisis communication, what exactly qualifies as a crisis for a company or data?
There is also a lot of fusion between crisis and incident. How does one incident qualifies to be a crisis and incident? So when there's something that's happening, localized. Suppose crisis is that which has a direct bearing on somebody's bottom line, somebody's operation getting affected. So that would qualify as a crisis.
How exactly does crisis communication help resolve these issues? Does it resolve the issue or, it just firefights the situation that
Two instances where we kind of the company overreacted on a crisis, and second that the company failed to even acknowledge the crisis when it
yeah.
was evolving. So there are seven topics that I have heard from organizations, and I call it the seven sins of crisis communication. And these are something that what crisis communication is. And top of the list is crisis communication is not damage control. Crisis communication doesn't come into the picture after the crisis has happened. Crisis communication has to do a lot with preparation, has to do a lot with training. So it starts much before your actual crisis hits. So look it as a damage control tool. You will never be benefited from what crisis communication can achieve for you. So I think this is communication. The thing it's all about media relations. The thing is that effective crisis communication is not limited to media relations. It kind of encompasses much more. So when you are talking about crisis communication, it involves your employees, it involves internal communication, it involves your stakeholders, it involves your investors. In some cases, related to sovereign government, it I think that crisis communication is also about preparation and training. You have to conduct training that will tell you that where are the areas that you can improve further. Also the human factor. Whenever there's a lot of focus on what we will do immediately, what is the immediate statement that would go out, and more often than not, we have seen that it fails to factor in empathy, it fails to factor in the human element. Like last thing that they do is in crisis communication is training only the leadership. Whenever I get a request for conducting simulation or conducting tabletop exercise, I would only see the CXOs in the room. So I give them the example like if you are to carry out a fire drill, would you only train the CEOs in your organization or the departmental heads? You will train the entire organization. So
Those are very
one thing that then it's a misconception is that your business continuity can work separately, your BCP plan, your crisis plan can work separately, and so you see there are siloed plans which are working independently, and when the crisis hits, you suddenly realize that there is no way to communicate
yeah.
between.
Some might argue that controversy also gets a kind of visibility and engagement. What's your take on communication strategy?
Bad publicity is a good publicity only work in this situation.
Yeah.
It will not work for CEO organization. It will work when you are an individual influencer like we are seeing on Instagram. Person like Rupi Javed, it will work to some extent because she's getting short-term visibility. And I admire how she's capitalizing on the short-term visibility, converting into one revenue stream. So it will work for individuals or who staying in like top of the mind really help. It's also very important to do something organization to recognize this thing if you have CEO who is sort of stepping into that territory. It's up to you to bring him and even with him because the kind of reputational damage is there already. It's eroding trust, which takes years to build. In this flaky world, it would take you even more to rebuild on the.
And welcome to another episode of Indian Media with Experts. I'm Mamta Sharma, your host for the day. This episode will be discussing an important topic how to handle crisis communication with our expert today, Piyali Mandal. Piyali is a global strategic communication advisor, media trainer, and an expert in crisis communication and reputation management. Welcome to the show, Piyali.
Thank you so much, Mamta. Thank you so much, Dhireen, for having me here. It's a very relevant topic and it's an evergreen topic. Crisis has always been a pain point for organizations. So I'm very, very excited to be on this platform and take a deep dive on the issues that is really kind of facing the kind of issues that is creating challenges for our industry.
Great. To start off, Piyali, could you give us a quick introduction to your career journey and what exactly do you do now?
Right. I'm Piyali Mandal, media trainer, crisis communication advisor, and leadership communication coach. My journey as a communicator began really as a business journalist. So that's where I had a front row seat to experience and witness all the corporate crises unraveling, reporting on them. That's exactly where I developed the knack for spotting signs of emerging crisis and asking questions that would make the headlines. From there, I took a mid-career break. I pursued my second master's in international relations from London School of Economics with a focus on de-radicalization studies. During my course as a in Kashmir during the peak of insurgency, and that's where I experienced crisis from a different perspective, where crisis actually means your life is on the line and it's life and death. When I switched to consulting, I gained a new perspective on crisis. So I've looked at crisis from a different lens, first as a journalist, as a researcher, and then as a consultant. And I have been afforded this opportunity to really have a 360 view of crisis. Again, how you react and respond to it boils down to preparation. So, how you respond to a crisis is basically a direct reflection of how you have prepared for. So, at present, I am the founder of Media Coach. I conduct media training. I design crisis drills. I design tabletop exercises, full scale crisis simulations. There's a lot of psychological involvement and participation during crisis simulation. So basically, you can say that I create crisis where there are and all that boils down to preparing the workforce.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Piyali. Let's start with the basics. When you talk about crisis communication, what exactly qualifies as a crisis for a company or a leader?
Right. So when you talk about crisis can be any event, anything that threatens your integrity. And when I say your, it could be individual mission that threatens your integrity, your reputation, the functions, the operation, normal operation of the organization, business continuity, and requires immediate action. So now there is also a lot of fusion between crisis and incident. How does one incident qualifies to be a crisis and everything? So when there's something that's happening, localized. Suppose now we are on a call, suddenly your network goes out. So it's not a crisis as such, it's an incident because it's very important. It's manageable at a certain level. And if it has to be a crisis, it's when, I say something about the client, I disclose some very sensitive information over here, which has a direct bearing on someone's bottom line, someone's operation getting affected. So that will qualify as a crisis. So if you have to really say that what is a crisis, what is an incident, there are 4, 5 factors that you need to look. Like when you say crisis, the impact is much bigger. The impact is on your bottom line, the impact is on your reputation, business continuity. There could be loss of lives and life. The second thing that you need to look is the kind of attention that event is. So also a bit of uncertainty involved in crisis. So whenever there is crisis, inevitably you would not have all the information at once. There's a level of urgency that you have to respond or you have to in a crisis. You can say that no, I can wait. So when it's a crisis, there is an urgency, there is an uncertainty, there is also a risk of escalation. That if you don't address it right now, it can escalate into something bigger.
Bigger.
Also, the kind of response that would be required. When it's an incident, it can be managed at a factory level, at a certain level, you can handle it. But when it's a crisis, then you need a concerted effort. Different teams need to be pulled in. You need to get the leadership, the management involved. So those are the telltale signs of a crisis. And it's important to have the identification and know the difference because, at times what happens is if there is an incident and we start overreacting and we start pulling in all our resources, it doesn't serve the purpose. And if we fail to notice the telltale signs of the crisis and discount it as an incident, then it can snowball into something bigger and then it becomes
So the incident that the issues that you mentioned, Piyali, how exactly does crisis communication help resolve these issues? Does it resolve the issue, or it just firefights the situation that you rightly mentioned might snowball into a bigger controversy, or might harm the bottom line or other issues?
right, right. Before I come to that question, let me set the context that why so important to distinguish between the two,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And let me give you a few examples that happened very recently, where two instances where we kind of the company overreacted on a crisis, and second, that the company failed to even acknowledge the crisis when it
Yeah.
was evolving. So we all have read about when some Altman OpenAI was ousted by the board of directors, right? So the news came in late afternoon, Friday.
Mhm.
And after that, it was like nothing. The whole social media went wild, guessing what happened. There was a lot of speculation. There was no information from the company. So there was no preparation from the company that someone has been ousted, someone is
Yeah.
stepping in, and this is the reason why it happened.
Yeah.
So they even for the whole weekend, like Saturday, Sunday, there was no communication. So that created a lot of speculation. And the stakeholders, investors, they started getting worried that what exactly. So
Yeah.
that's one example where you fail to even understand that this is an incident where ousting the CEO. So there is going to be a repercussion and it's going to be a crisis. And on the crisis part on overreaction, I recently came across a post by an engineering organization, an Indian organization that the corpcomm posted a clipping for news item here, and the
Mhm.
news item has a negative tone about the topic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, in her LinkedIn post, she didn't actually defended actually defended her statements, but she just mentioned that this is wrong, doing this. Now, what happened? The journalist also posted this law. I
Yeah.
went
Yeah.
to check on his post, there were only 9 comments, some 4, 5. When
Yeah.
she posted it, there were some 20 comments and some 50 likes also. So what happened was something where she has nothing to defend actually. It was the journalist point of view.
Yeah.
So if she had something, if the story was actually wrong, she could have asked for a rejoinder or she could have gone on to the reached out to the journalist. But instead, by posting it and trying to share her point of view, what she did was actually drawing more attention to the negative story. So
True.
for people who didn't read the story,
Read this. Yeah.
now read the story, most of the comments even below our post was all negative about the company.
Yeah.
They were
Yeah.
bringing out these instances to validate the journalist point of view. So this is where you shouldn't overreact to something and take your time to really respond.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now coming back to your thing, it's communication really helps.
Mhm.
Crisis communication helps in many ways, and it doesn't help in some ways that companies think. So let me first say what are the ways it helps, and then I'll burst some of the myths and misconceptions of what it is. So crisis communication, first up, is helps you put your narrative forward. It helps you control the narrative during a crisis. So there is a saying that goes that if you don't tell your story, someone else will tell it, and then you will have to defend your story. So the best part is during the crisis, you have the ownership of your story. You go ahead and you control the narrative. Second up, like I mentioned, that what consists a crisis is uncertainty. So people genuinely are looking for information. If there is a chemical spill, if there is a blast in a company, if there is some major outage, if there is a cybersecurity incident like the one we saw recently with CrowdStrike, people are genuinely concerned. They want to know, they want to get information when the thing will start, when the thing will resume. What is the kind of helpline we have put in place? Where can I get more information? So, crisis, when you communicate, you also kind of reduce that uncertainty and make your stakeholders, your employees, your community, your stakeholders, investors, you kind of reach out to all of them with the relevant information. It builds trust. See, when you are not communicating, people think that when you are quiet, you have something to. So it kind of makes you look big. So even if you are at fault, even if you are not at fault in the initial crisis stage, you don't know what it is, how things are going to unfold. The best way is to communicate and acknowledge the crisis. And what it does is it builds trust. It prevents escalation. If you don't provide information, if you don't communicate, what will happen is it will create an information vacuum that people will start filling it with their speculation. And the crisis will further escalate. Most importantly, one of the neglected aspect of crisis communication is the human factor. Most of the times we get so caught up in the legalities and trying to save the organization from further litigation, we forget that there is human emotions involved during a crisis. Those who are affected are human, those who are responding are human. So, crisis communication, effective crisis communication, brings in that human factor into the equation. It tries to address the human concern, it builds on the empathy, right? And lastly, it empowers your team to, when you're fighting a crisis, you can't do it alone. You need your team. And when you communicate effectively, it brings your team on board and make them your extended crisis communication. Now, these are some of the things that crisis communication, and would say there are seven topics that I have heard from organizations, and I call it the seven sins of crisis communication. And these are something that, what crisis communication is. And top of the list is crisis communication is not damage control. Crisis communication doesn't come into the picture after the crisis has happened. Crisis communication has to do a lot with preparation, has to do a lot with training. So it starts much before your actual crisis hits. So look it as a damage control tool. You will never be benefited from what crisis communication can achieve for you. So it is a tool which helps you prepare and be more resilient and of course help in your recovery after the crisis. Second thing that I hear a lot is when you think about crisis communication, the thing that come into your mind is it's all about media relations. Many times I hear organizations say that, oh, we have a good media relation, our CEO knows the editor, all these things. But the thing is that effective crisis communication is not limited to media relations. It kind of encompasses much more. So when you are talking about crisis communication, it involves your employees, it involves internal communication, it involves your stakeholders, it involves your investors. In some cases related to sovereign government, it impacts bilateral relations as well. So it's not just about media. So you need to think of crisis communication as something more than just media management.
Yeah, yeah.
The third thing that crisis communication and what people really kind of doesn't factor in is crisis communication is also about preparation and training. So you can't expect that when the crisis happens, suddenly your communication plan would come to life, people would start following it, everything will go smooth. Or recent some of the research shows that most of the crisis, the breakdown doesn't happen tech part, but it happens at the human communication. So you can have the best crisis communication plan drawn out, but if you don't prepare your employees, if you don't test and review that plan regularly, then you wouldn't know where is the weakest link. So one thing that people really overlook when they talk about crisis communication is the preparation and training. Like I always tell my clients, your crisis plan, it's not a document that you can leave it on the shelf to collect dust. It's a living document. You have to keep reviewing it in between crises. You have to keep reviewing it in peacetime. You have to conduct training that will tell you that where are the areas that you can improve further. Also, the human factor. Whenever crisis plan, I have reviewed hundreds of crisis plan, and in most of the plan, the human factor comes the last. So there's a lot of focus on what we will do immediately, what is the immediate statement that would go out, and more often than not, we have seen that it fails to factor in empathy, it fails to factor in the human element. Like the recent crowd statement, also I've reviewed it and I've written an article also on that as to how the first response really lacked a human touch. It sounded like a AI chatbot wrote it. It was very sound from the legal point of view, but in a crisis when hundreds and thousands of people are impacted, you can't send out a legal document. You have to acknowledge the crisis and you have to do it as a human communicating with another human. The last thing that they do is in crisis communication is training only the leadership. So whenever I get a request for conducting simulation or conducting tabletop exercise, I would only see the CXOs in the room. So I give them the example, like if you are to carry out a fire drill, would you only train the CEOs in your organization or the departmental heads? You will train the entire organization. So how your receptionist answers the call when she gets a call from media or a concerned person, how your security guard handles when there is a mob building at your entrance when there is a crisis, it all adds up. So you cannot say that I will only train and crisis communication is only the domain of my leadership team. Your whole team, your whole organization, down to the security staff, needs to be part of your crisis communication.
True, true. Those are
The
very
last thing that again, it's a misconception is that, your business continuity can work separately, your BCP plan, your crisis plan can work separately. And when I ask them that, do you have a social media crisis plan? It's a separate entity. So you see, there are siloed plans which are working independently, and when the crisis hits, you suddenly realize that there is no way to communicate between all the plans. So that's again another misconception that your crisis document should be with a certain team. So your crisis communication document should be all encompassing. It should have your BCP, it should have your social media, it should have your crisis management. Like I said, it should be a living document that you should, whenever you're conducting a drill or a simulation, you should conduct it across all the plans. You should test all this in synchronization because when a real crisis hits, you can't say that, hold on, my social media is not hit or
yeah. Those are very relevant points, Piyali. Talking more about social media, that is one of the most powerful communication platform today. And you gave us examples how, companies go wrong while addressing a crisis. If you had to give companies or CEOs the top two, three tips to prepare or mitigate a social media backlash, what would it be?
Right. So let's look at the basic of social media.
Yeah.
What exactly it is. When we
Yeah.
say social media, what it is. We are talking about user generated content. We are talking about people writing blog. We are talking about people posting their views, their opinion. And now, how social media is different from traditional is, of course, the scale, the speed at which you can reach people, and also the level of interaction. It's a very interactive platform. I will see you and your leaders on social media. Uh, they will have to abide by certain do's and don'ts. And it goes with everything. Kind of places you would usually see on social media, even for your CEO. The CEO is just one part of it where your leadership stuff said something, then there is a lot of that. The kind of social media crisis that an organization and individual can face is one from your internal sources, like your own CEO
Yeah.
uh, talking about your company, your former CEO talking or saying something about your company. Like we have seen recently, Lulu then CEO, former CEO, comment about the company's current initiatives. They faced a lot of backlash. Wow, that like you mentioned right now, CEO saying something about 18 hours work, uh, and how youngsters should put in more work hours, work-life balance is a myth. So it comes from your internal source and your leadership. Now the second line of crisis that can come from, and it adds up to that internal crisis, is when people start commenting or spreading misinformation about what's being said. So what
Yeah.
happens is that your leader must have said something, and then people would have pull it out of context, and they start sharing it. And to some extent, it's not exactly in that context the leader would have said. So there is misinformation that comes into the picture. There could be rumors and speculation
Yeah.
about your CEO or your leadership. So there could be issues related to rumor. So rumor, misinformation, getting up to already the internal crisis created. And the fourth one where all of us are struggling right now and none of us are answered to is when people start questioning you on the ethical and moral grounds.
Yeah.
Like we live in a polarized world and we see a lot of sharp opinions and extreme opinions and positions coming into the world. So this is the landscape your CEO is navigating right now. So whatever he says, there could be all this backlash. There could be some kind of rumor, speculation, misinformation, or he would be questioned on the morality and ethical part of what's being said. So this is very, very tricky, and organizations themselves should have guardrails in place. Again, it brings me back to the training point of view, where organizations need to conduct regular training for their employees. Like recently, I did an article on how companies are not prepared when there are protests or activism going outside.
Yeah.
Like people are protesting about certain issues. You're walking into the office, you don't know how to handle that. You
Yeah.
go and engage with the protesters, things spiral out of control. One thing comes into the picture here is just telling your employees or writing it down in your HR document or onboarding document that you can share this on social media.
Yeah.
You have to build in that crisis memory in them. You have to
Yeah.
show them that, okay, so real time simulations and drill that what happens if you post this.
True. True.
Suppose your leadership at times, leadership comes with a lot of arrogance that they refuse to see the kind of fault that they had fault and what they have said is not really effective. They refuse to be judged on the moral,
Mhm.
which is fine if you're an individual, but when you're representing a large organization, a lot of livelihood, a lot of things at stake, things doesn't really work out that way. And the
Mhm.
best way at that time to show your leadership that what can go wrong is to create those simulations. So I faced a client where one person came to me saying, my CEO is all over the place when it comes to social media, but it's so difficult to argue with him. So how do we show him that, he needs training, he needs to put in some of the best practices because we have been writing mails to him, we have been showing him this is the reaction we got, and this is the kind of sentiment that is there. But it's not really registering that. So then we designed a real-time crisis scenario where we let him speak on some of the issues that he's been talking about, and then he could see the real-time polling that was happening. He could see that immediately it was affecting his stock prices. And not only that, he could see the internal channels. We create the mock-ups of their internal platform as well, and he could see how his employee morale was slowly coming down. So that's where, preparation and training comes into the play. So some of the things, like I said, that they can do is showing the leadership, the repercussions of their words, what is going to happen, conducting regular training, and conducting regular training not only for the leadership, also for the entire team, for them to know that when they go out on social media, when they say something, it all has a bearing on the company's reputation, company's bottom line at times, and company's existence in some extreme cases. And also, two piece of advice that I would like to give because you said that if there is some standout advice that I can give. One thing I've seen is when you see a negative comment, when you see a trolling, when you see someone writing negatively about your organization, the immediate thing that companies do is go on the defense. And then instead of engaging with the person or instead of engaging with what's being said, they go into the legal aspect of it. We have seen this incident play out with Food Farmer and Raven, and we all know how it played out, sending him a legal notice. So, when on social media, any negative comment, any negative sentiment about your brand or organization is actually an opportunity for you to convert it into a positive. And that can only happen when you genuinely engage, be transparent. If you are at fault, acknowledge it. And even if you are not at fault, acknowledge that you have heard about this complaint and you're doing something about it. So I'll just wrap this up in terms of what are the three, four things that companies do other than having a strong policy with, which guardrails as to the do's and don'ts, preparing your employees, training your employees on them. First thing, what you can do is when your CEO or anyone has already spoken about it, it's already a crisis, what you can do is take the battle already. It's like, Twitch on X or LinkedIn or say any other platform, it's kind of exploding. So you take the conversation on those platforms. You can't be then only confined to your own media and you can't confined to next day's press or I will do an article, I will do a magazine printout or a television interview. You have to um, take the battle where it's being fought. So you have to go on that platform and counter it, talk about it, and the keyword here is engage, not intimidate. Like I said, you cannot really go over there and start intimidating the people who doesn't align with what you feel is. And that also brings me to the part where companies try to monopolize the discussion. When there is something that has happened and they are trying to give a clarification, they try to monopolize the whole discussion and try to put forward their point of view that no, 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 my product is this, my product is not that. I have these five pointers that I have to share. So instead of that, it would help if you sit back and listen and monitor the social media. Now you have so many tools that can help you monitor sentiments on social media. What are the kind of discussions that is happening on social media? which kind of discussions are spiraling towards a crisis. So listen to all those conversations and discussions, because that's one of the advantage of social media. It's an interactive two-way tool, two-way platform. So take that advantage. And when you respond after listening. Don't just go out there with a heavy hand and giving out your key messages and it's going to be like my way. No, it's a dialogue, it's a platform where you can have a dialogue, where you can engage. Go after listening, prepare your data points, prepare your argument, and then try to counter misinformation with information. Share with your audience that where they can get more information. If you feel that something being said is wrong or it's not actually correct, guide your audience to where they can go and find those relevant information.
Those are very relevant points, Piali. And one of the major, takeaway that I have from your suggestion is that if you do make a mistake, even if it is a leader or a company, I think you're absolutely right. You to own up to that mistake, than to, hopelessly firefight it. Do you think, there are so many repercussions on social media whenever there is a crisis for a leader or a company. We recently saw a company come out with social media policy for their employees and leaders. Do you think such policies, it's a good idea, or how effective can these be? Do you know in a crisis situation?
See, like I said, a policy or a plan is a piece of paper. Unless you make it a living document, it doesn't serve any purpose.
Mhm.
So ultimately, it boils down to like the crisis communication point that I made earlier, that crisis communication is not about what you're communicating to that damages them.
Mhm.
About making friends before you meet.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
about bringing your employees on board, aligning them with your vision, your values, so that they know that what is to be done and what are the things that they shouldn't be doing. Now, there is a rule. Show them that why it's there in the first place. What is the context? Why you have put that thing in place? If you are taking stand on a war between two countries, explain it to them where in the broad spectrum you are in. If you are neutral, why is it so? Explain that you have operations in different geographies or both the geographies and why it's important for you to support both the geographies. So you have to be transparent, you have to be honest, and you have to, again, bringing back to my point, communicate before your employees are going out there. And I also do conduct a lot of cybersecurity training, and mostly in cybersecurity, what I see is the focus on crisis has always been on the prevention side of it.
Yeah, yeah.
That how do I prevent the crisis from happening? How do I put in more laws, more regulation, more policies in place to prevent? But we focus 10% on preparation or
Mhm.
building the resilience that, okay, let me divide it 50-50. I have built a fortress around with my laws and with my policies. Now, if the fortress is breached, what are the employees going to do? What are we going to do?
Yeah.
So let me build that resilience in my team. Let me train them. Let me tell them that, okay, you are saying this. Now you see the repercussion. If you say it in real time, this is the kind of trolling our organization would face. This is the kind of reputational damage we would have. This is the kind of value erosion we would see. So you have
Mhm.
to tell them, you have to communicate with them, and don't stop them. Then you have to really make them experience it through regular trainings and regular drills.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
this is what it is. When you are in the heat of the moment, you should know what to do. If you are highly charged about some incident happening, immediately you think about the trainings that you had and immediately you stop yourself, take a pause, think about posting something.
Yeah. So, that would have been my next question. When you talk about, companies or leaders taking sides when there is a social issue or, is something political. But do you think it's that easy for a company or a leader to do so? Because even when, I totally agree that, if it's something like the Kolkata incident or, something that's affecting the society, one should put the company's side, but still we don't often, see them come out openly about it. What do you think is the reason? And my question that, isn't that easy for them to even, practice something like that?
It's not. And
Yeah,
I also really don't have a very simple answer to that because, like I said, we are living in a society where everyone is on the
yeah, yeah,
our opinions are extreme, our viewpoints are sharp, our tolerance level is zero. So our leaders, our CEOs are navigating an environment which is this complex, where
hmm,
every word they say is being highly scrutinized and it can be taken out of context. It can blow out of proportion and
yeah,
to the extent that it can threaten the existence of the organization.
true,
But still, what leaders can do is see there is no substitute to being transparent.
yeah,
And that's a universal thing that will cut across every. Now, I talk about this, and recently I got this very interesting question that how can leaders be honest in this environment?
yeah,
So I tell them that, focus on honesty itself, focus on transparency.
mm-hmm.
Honesty is what you honestly feel about a situation. Like
Yeah,
how Piyali Mandal feel about the incident at Arjikar,
yeah,
and having that opinion and view is my honesty.
mhm,
Now, when I'm transparent with you, I am doing some action. I'm conveying that honesty, putting that honesty into words and translating it in a way that will resonate with, or at
true,
least I'm making an effort to reach
mhm,
out to you and explain. So leaders, along with being honest and upfront, these days need to practice a lot of transparency and empathy. So key thing that they can use in all the times, and that's why it's so important in today's day is your own value compass.
mhm.
So you compass, it's your organization's value system that will really guide you towards it. That so when you are faced with a challenging situation, use your value compass to guide you.
Should I ask the bad publicity question?
Yeah,
Publicity is also a kind of publicity. Some might argue that controversy also gets a kind of visibility and engagement. What's your take on the communication strategy?
I when we started this saying that publicity is also good publicity, it's from the point of view of marketing. If you're visible, you'll sell.
Yeah.
Selling, you need to be out there.
Mhm.
Now, with social media coming into the equation, things are drastically changed.
Mhm.
So bad publicity is a good publicity can only work in this situation. It will not work if you're an organization. It's like playing.
Yeah.
You can manage it, you are great. You are really the leader, but if you it can really cause you a lot of so that risk is not worth it. Right?
Yeah, we see some CEOs also in social media platforms after, some of their statements on social media that they posted.
Right. So I tell you where this kind of bad publicity works.
Yeah.
It will not work for CEO organization. It will
Mhm.
work when you are an individual influencer like we are seeing on Instagram. Like we've
Yeah.
seen this, I'm not sure if you've seen this viral video on YouTube of Bhagavati, the singer, Jagat
Mhm.
Pateli. It's a
Yeah.
ridiculous song which was one of the most watched video on YouTube. Suddenly, overnight fame and everything. So this kind of publicity, bad publicity,
Mhm.
for a person like Rupi Javed, it will work to some extent because she's getting short-term visibility. And
Yes.
I admire how she's capitalizing on that short-term visibility and
Yes.
converting into one revenue stream. So it will
Yes.
work for individuals for whom staying in like top of the mind would really help.
Mhm.
It would help for some of the CEOs who've always been known to be very, flamboyant.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't want to. So when I do media training CEOs also, I always avoid templatizing and putting the CEO in a box. So I try to figure out what are their natural way of talking, how are they as a personality, what are the words they generally. Sometimes some it might look, acceptable. Like
I mean, when you talk about companies, I think it's the employees more than, and I remember your earlier point on that human connect or, addressing the employees rather than just, firefighting the media. So, yeah, very relevant point
right.
there.
So the leaders also need to think that okay, I have a voice, but I also have a bigger responsibility.
Responsibility. Yeah,
If
yeah.
I'm saying this, whom am I addressing it?
Mhm.
Like simply because I have a social media platform, I cannot decide, wake up one morning and decide that I'll just go out there and rant.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I have to have a plan in mind that, okay, if I have to say something, is it I'm doing it to create a controversy? Fair enough. If
Mhm.
I'm doing it to have top of the mind recall for myself, then what is the plan? How my company can capitalize?
Yeah,
Do I
yeah.
have a plan? And if I fail, then what is the repercussions? And does it
Mhm.
really worth it doing that? Recently, we have also seen the Poonam Pandey cervical cancer
Oh, yeah,
campaign,
yeah,
you
yes, yes,
would have seen. So
yes.
it was all done in with good intent. It was
Yeah.
all done in good faith, good intent, but
Mhm.
the repercussions and the reactions was not what
Yeah,
the
she might.
brand
Correct.
also anticipated. The
Mhm.
social media agency who executed it also didn't anticipate that.
Yeah, yeah.
So what happened was that when I did a research after that to see, because there was a lot of noise around that, at least we could manage to bring cervical cancer into the discussion and people are talking about it, even though
Mhm.
our means was not acceptable, but it justifies the end. So I did a
Mhm.
research on Google and found out that after came that it was all a publicity stunt. The number of times people search for Poonam Pandey were way higher than the number of times people search for
It was
cervical cancer.
cervical
So
cancer.
it
Yeah.
totally defeated the purpose.
The
So
purpose.
when we
Absolutely.
playing with those kinds of gimmickries and trying to capitalize on some stunt or some event, it has its fallout. So you
True.
have to weigh in your stakes, you have to weigh in your risk, and you have to see that okay, if it doesn't go the way I anticipated to, then what are the financial loss or loss of face that I can face. So
Like that, funny thing, because I remember men were so upset. They didn't bother how she died. They were just bothered that Pandey is no more. And
yeah,
it was, I didn't know the research part of it that, people actually did that. Of course, there was an awareness, but like you rightly said, it just defeated the entire purpose.
yeah.
So
So
because that is really insightful. Actually, so many relevant points and very actionable. I mean, I really hope that our audience, be it leaders or even employees for that matter, take some relevant takeaways from your talk. Thank you for giving us your time, Piali, and thank you for being on the show.